Okay, we promised to have multiple episodes with us in it, and this is episode number 2. So we're up to 3 for 2026. We're on a roll. We're gonna be in y'all's faces all the time. So
Only if
we're
you
gonna go.
click on
We're gonna
it.
what?
Only if they click on it.
You're gonna
They're
click
like
on it
clicking off
because
now.
Alex Alexander's getting really good at thumbnails.
He is. He's got some clickbaity ones.
This guy clickbait.
I
I
like
clicked
him.
on my own video. I was like, "What is this about?" And then I was disappointed. But
The face of
but
someone who knows something. Let me click.
yeah. But you won't be disappointed tonight because we're going to talk about family matters. We're always the church is a family. We're always talking about family matters. We're going to talk about family issues again, and the church is a family, so we're gonna continue that down that vein. But specifically tonight, we're going to talk about real households, sons and daughters, um, and something we take for granted because we just assume if we're in a family, especially if you do have young children, your upbringing might have been, hey, you grow up, and when you're 18, it's time for you to take adulthood and leave the house, and married or not, you just kind of leave and you do your adult thing and you separate from your parents, and they parents kind of wash their hands, they've done their duty, and so be it. I think many of us, I was myself was kind of raised with that idea. I perpetuated that myself. I wanted to be out, which might not necessarily be a bad thing. I think children should want to start their own families. However, uh, we don't have a good view or a correct, a biblical view of how we look at our families and when is the appropriate time to have our children not disconnect from us, but to establish a um, a fob, right? Their own little base that they're going to raise their own children,
Nice.
and the families coexist. When is the appropriate time to do that? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'll hand it over.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be kind of a radical uh, difference between our modern culture and what we see in the Bible. And people could try to argue, well, this is descriptive in the Bible, not prescriptive. But I think what we're going to talk about tonight is that I think what we can get from a lot of verses is that this is actually probably something that God would want us to do. And then I think we'll make a more practical argument as well as to why you should do it. But I think we should start where we should start for anything. Like what is God's ideal? What do the biblical authors do when they want to find out what is God's ideal as opposed to something happening in the church and the culture? Well, they go back to creation. And so whatever's in the creation account, there's an assumed what I would say a priority argument there, where what is laid out there is what God wants his people to do, not just in the ideal world before the fall, but afterward. And so when you go to Genesis chapter 2, and you look in Genesis 2:24, if we want to actually, anybody wants to turn to that. I want to read it because we never really consider what it says. We kind of read over it. We're amazed that God, made a woman out of a man and all that sort of thing. But in verse 24, this is Adam in his response. He's saying the woman is, bone of his bones, flesh of his flesh. And then he says that for this reason, so it's all Cain in Hebrew, a man will leave his father and mother and unite with his wife, and they will become one. And depending on your like mine says they'll become a new family or something, but it literally just says they'll become echad, one. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother. And so from that point on, as you go through the biblical narrative, you start seeing that the norm of God's pattern for family is you have a family, you raise your children, and your children remain with you. Except for in a couple extraordinary circumstances, they remain with you until they are married. So they are moving from family to family. In our culture, what happens is they move from family to singleness, to family again. And I'm sorry, when you are single, the lack of responsibility that you have, it creates basically a feeling of freedom. In the same way that, let's say you just didn't work for a long time, you'd have a feeling of freedom. You have a really hard time getting back to work from that point, because now you're going back into what you view as more of a burden. It's more like slavery in contrast to your freedom. Same thing with when you're moving from singleness to family, you're going to have more burden. It's going to seem more like slavery, and you're really actually putting the person in a place to where just pragmatically, they're going to have a harder time with marriage, I think, because of it and the commitment of marriage. And that's not even saying toward what they might do when they're single. Because when you have family, family is a protection over the individual. It's a guidance over the individual that then you take away from them when they move out and they're single and they're just doing their thing. They move out with their peers. That still is being single. I don't care if they have roommates or not. And all sorts of temptations come in. You really can lose your kid at that point, frankly. Send them away to college, whatever it may be, where they're moving out. We have created a culture where we've set our kids up to fail just because of this move. Just because of this one thing you would think would not be a big deal. And again, as April was saying, like in our last podcast, because we view maturity as autonomy, we think this is a good thing. Move out, become your own person, do your own thing, and then you'll really become mature. You'll really know how to live and whatnot, take care of yourself, all of that. But that's not really the pattern in Scripture. And so we have Genesis saying this. Then we have this weird thing in Deuteronomy that we're about to talk about where you have this son who's like getting drunk and he's not obeying his parents. And, you know, every atheist is going to be like, oh, see, you're supposed to kill your 3-year-old kids. Take them out and stone them. It's like, no, did you not read the part where he's getting drunk and he's eating all his parents' food? This is an adult male who lives with his parents. Well, how would you have that situation if they moved out? You wouldn't. They're not moving out. Then you go to the book of Proverbs and you realize Solomon's talking to his adult sons. And he's telling them, you as an adult sons need to listen to your parents, not your peers. So in other words, autonomy is not a good thing. It's a wicked thing. It's what the fool does. It's what the wicked person does. You need to, as a young man, not just a young woman, because you have so many people that agree that the woman's supposed to do this, but not the man. The young man is to actually put himself under the authority of his parents and obey them. And what's it till? Till he finds the noble woman to marry. That's what Proverbs is all about. Then you get to the New Testament, you have this parable about the prodigal son. And he wants his inheritance early, and he takes it, and he goes and he does what he wants with it. The father says of him that actually his son is lost because of it. His son is lost, but when he comes back into the household under the father, now he's found. And God uses this, of course, as an analogy. But if that weren't the case in the biblical model for household, it wouldn't make a good analogy. People would be like, what are you talking about? Everybody leaves their parents when they get older. And so you have that assumed household there as well. And then you'll have things like Paul mentioned, of course, in Galatians, where it's a time appointed by the father, and then the son will gain the inheritance, but the son is still under the father until that time, under guardians. So you have all this stuff. You have Christ using an analogy. The father sets appointed times. The son doesn't even know them. The son's in submission to the father for those appointed times, all that sort of thing. Because even as an adult son, he's still in submission to the father. So all of this just to say that our modern construct that to where we believe, oh, it's moving out is the norm. Like you turn a certain age as a young man and you move out and then you might get married later, is not a biblical idea. And because it's not biblical and we don't pay attention to it, we just kind of do our own thing that the culture's doing, we end up having a lot of really negative effects. The devil sees that. Our kids are prey. and he goes in for the attack. It's usually through sexual immorality he'll get them involved in. He'll send all sorts of professors that'll have great arguments as why Christianity isn't true and why his parents are stupid and he shouldn't listen to them. He'll give peer groups to your kids. The number one thing Proverbs says not to do is to have your peers as your guidance instead of your parents. And yet he'll give that to the children because he knows that's the way to lead them away from their children. Even discipline in Proverbs, what we say is spoil the rod, or spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not really said in Proverbs, but it's a summary of kind of Proverbs saying that you're supposed to actually have a rod, to the back of your child. But that's not talking about little children. That's talking about young men. It's the na'ar. And so, and even the idea, if you let an na'ar, a young man, go his way when he's older, he won't depart from it. And that's a bad thing because you don't want the young man going his own way. You don't want him going according to what he thinks is right because the devil has confused young men and he'll continue to confuse them through the adulterous woman, through his peers that the devil is going to use with false ideas, through false prophets, whatever it may be. And he needs parents to guard him. Just like the woman needs parents to guard her. And so she doesn't leave the home until she gets married. And of course, there's a bridal price thing when she does and all that sort of thing. But we have completely lost this. We look at this and be like, oh, that's just another culture. But my point would be is that then why is it rooted in creation? Why is it for this reason? Not this is one of the reasons. It's for this reason a man will leave his father and mother. Why is it that at creation? I would say, well, this is because God's ideal. And this is why most cultures have, because of natural revelation, they have this understanding. I'm going to keep my kids until they begin this new family. They go off and they start this new thing.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this. From my own experience as a young woman, I had a similar experience to Drake where it was assumed that when I was 18, I was not allowed to live at home anymore. It wasn't even really an option of, okay, well, you're going to go to college and live at home. Like, I just was not to be living at home. That was the assumption that was made. Now, that led to a lot of sin and a lot of pain and a lot of problems because as a young woman, you are looking for another source of that father figure that you've lost, right? So initially that was, well, I guess I'm going to join the military because I don't know where to go. I need someone to take care of me. So then the government becomes that. And then when I left that, it was, okay, I'm living in Albuquerque by myself and now I can't make rent. And so I'm going to move in with one of my male coworkers and we're going to share the rent because that's the only way that I can make this work. Like, you're putting your daughters into terrible situations that because you think that this type of worldly experience is going to gain some kind of adult maturity for them. It doesn't work that way. It leads you into further sin. It devastates, particularly women. I think it devastates men as well, but particularly women, it devastates them. All because we have this foolishness that, and frankly, and maybe I'll get heated about it, but frankly, part of it is that parents are being selfish because parents are saying, well, you're 18, I've done my job. I don't want to be responsible anymore for taking care of you financially or guiding you in that way. And maybe they're deluding themselves into thinking that what they're doing is helpful and beneficial for you and allowing you to, kicking you out of the nest, so to speak, and figure out how to fly. But you're not flying, you're crashing to the ground, and you are destroyed. That's actually what you're doing to your kids. It is not a positive.
Yeah, I do think it's probably both, right? There's a selfishness there, but it's also like, oh, but this is also the moral thing to do. Because they've been taught by our culture that, again, like you said before, autonomy is a virtue. It's maturity. And so I'm teaching my kid how to be autonomous, and that's good. And we had this conversation with a part of Allison's family a long time ago because we were allowing like our kids to sleep in our bed sometimes, and I was like, yeah, they're like, but that doesn't teach them independence, and I'm like, I don't want my kids learning independence. Independence is another word for rebellion. Independence is another word for I'm going to do things my way. Like, I don't want independent children. I want children who can be responsible. I want children who can take care of themselves. I want children who won't be afraid at night, and I can nurture them into that point. But I don't want them to be independent. But we have this virtue that independence is the top virtue. When you're independent, you've reached the pinnacle. And so I think that our culture teaches parents this so that even if they have any instinct to where, man, I don't know if my kid's ready, I really want to hold on to them, I want to guide them further, nurture them further, they feel like they're doing something wrong because the standard is kick you out of the house, you go get a job, you go to college, you go rent an apartment on your own, like that, and that's how you grow up. Rather than understanding, no, you grow up as you become an adult and start helping out with the household that you're in, and then you move from that household when you get married into another household. That's when you grow up and you have children of your own. That's growing up, not you becoming something that has nothing to do with family, nothing to do with children, nothing to do with the creation mandate. That's not you growing up. That's you growing away from God.
I want to step into my father's shoes for a moment because I think there's the selfish aspect, which is prolific. There's also because fathers want their children to know like the real world.
Yeah.
So I even see this like innately in myself. Like I want to expose my son to how things are, to like prepare him to protect the weak, to be strong, right? To think about others and like to see his life as a sacrifice for other Christians. And for my father, that was his desire for me, right? Is to know the real world. The problem is in my father's worldview, he wasn't given the church to show him how to guide me in reality, right? Through Christ's
Yeah.
eyes. So in my dad's mind, the only way I can get my kids to know reality is to throw them into it.
Right.
And what's the easiest and what's the way to do that? You put them outside the house because then you can't reality's there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's good. Like that's what that's what he wants. And maybe in the back of his mind we'll be there if he falls. We won't tell him this, right? We won't tell him. But if he does fall, we'll be there for him. But the kid, like I remember me thinking like my parents don't want me and the world doesn't want me. I knew that. I knew the world didn't want me because I was young. I didn't know anything. I had a college degree or a high school diploma, and that's it. And then September 11th happened, and then I knew now somebody wanted me. This is kind of April's point. Somebody wanted me.
Yep.
And
The military always wants you.
they always they're like, oh, okay, cool. But so there's this other side, and I think a lot of Christian fathers fall into this that have the same issue, which is they don't know how to actually train their children in reality, but in their house, to prepare them to then take that reality and start their own home and do the same thing over and over again.
But reality, for those of us who live in the context of the church, reality is not disconnection. It's not, reality is not even financial independence when you're a part of the body of Christ. Reality is not, you pull up your bootstraps and you do life on your own. That's what's being taught as reality when you have that perspective of, and I don't think my dad was doing it in a way that was selfish. I think he really was trying to prepare me for the real world by kicking me into it. I think he knows better now and would say that was a mistake. But that is not actually the representative of the reality of the Christian life, because the Christian life is not lived in isolation. And when you do this to your children, you're actually teaching them something false about the experience of the body of Christ and how they are to interact with one another. You're saying you need to fend for yourself. And to be frank, it's made it harder for me as an adult in many ways, but thinking about it in terms of the financial independence and feeling like, well, you need to just buckle down and do it yourself has created a certain amount of judgmentalism in me towards other Christians, because instead of being willing to help and saying, oh, we're all doing this together, we're living this together, please have what I have, it's like, well, why aren't they just doing it themselves, right? Because that's what you've been raised to believe is true
Right.
and is responsible, which is not the Christian experience.
It's the sin of Scrooge, right?
Yeah.
It's the sin of
Well,
Scrooge.
and I think like if anyone's ever lost on this and they don't know, it's like, oh, I'm not sure about this. Again, I would just go back to the creation mandate. Does staying with your family and learning to be a family and helping raise children, being a part of a household, does that push you more toward the creation mandate or further away? I would say it pushes you more toward it. Going out on your own, living the party life, or even if you're not going to do the party life and you're just going to make your life all about work, or you're going to make your life all about, the military or whatever it may be, whatever you're joining, or it's just going to be all about the boyfriend that you're shacking up with, or the girlfriend, or whoever it may be. None of that is pushing you toward the procreation, the creation mandate. None of that is pushing you toward this is how you build a healthy family. In fact, you have to do the opposite of what you're doing to become something different than you are right now in order to enter into the creation mandate and get married and do all of that. You literally have to enter into something completely different. So it shows you that lifestyle is not pushing you toward the creation mandate. And I mentioned there's a couple exceptions. The two exceptions are when you join the military as a male, because you have to defend your country. That seems to be when people, they're still under their fathers, but by the way, though, they're still, like Jesse's still sending food to the boys, right, on the field. And it's not like you're going to another nation somewhere. Like military means like, you're out on a field near your house fighting. It's not like it's like, a million miles away and you're completely living somewhere else or whatever. You're still connected to the household. Or you can be dedicated for ministry like Samuel is from Hannah, or Paul dedicates himself, or whatever. Like you're dedicated to ministry, which is part of the creation mandate. You've decided, hey, I'm gonna push toward this through ministry or whatever. Those are the only times that you see in the Bible people leaving father and mother for a legitimate reason that isn't marriage. And it's never the woman leaving, by the way. The woman's always staying under. But those are the only two other legitimate things for reason. They're the other extraordinary things, because hopefully you don't have war all the time and you're leaving for that. Because it's not like there's a military that you're joining and you're training or whatever. Like it's when war happens, you're just leaving your farm and going out to fight. Or you're leaving to join the priesthood in some way, or as a prophet or what have you. But that's the extraordinary circumstances. The norm is the creation mandate. This is the reason he leaves father and mother. This is the reason he takes them out from under their guidance, even though they're probably they should be guiding him into that marriage if all things are working correctly. This is the reason to become one with his wife, to start a new household, to extend his father's household. And we have just lost this. Even the idea that children are their fathers, right? This is something that people just are not aware of in the scripture, that children are actually the fathers, shows that the father then gets to set the time when they're going to be extended into another household. They don't get to decide that for themselves. Now, because we're Americans, we decide all of that for ourselves. We don't do marriage that way. It's not under the guidance of our families half the time. We're busy dating and all that sort of thing, which is just, talk about practicing for adultery and divorce. And so we set our culture, I guess what we need to say is our culture is not biblical, and it's not just something that is parallel to the biblical world. It's something that is anti-biblical in this area. That's what people need to get.
And it's just, frankly, very unwise. I mean, there are so
Yeah.
many reasons why it's unwise, but even just from like a stewardship perspective, if you have kids leaving the house, especially in this housing market, and you have kids going out and paying thousands of dollars for rent or trying to buy their own homes and throwing that money away. And I'm talking about, like, let's say you had, young men and you thought, well, yeah, keep the daughters at home, but the young men should go out and they should, work and figure out how to provide. They're throwing money away when they could be staying under the authority of their parents and actually saving for their own families. So even just practically speaking, it's not wise.
Well, and they're also the young men who are being corrupted that corrupt the young women. Like, it literally, they're becoming the men who corrupt the young women, because that's the type of men that you create in those situations. I had a situation which was ironic to me when I got into a dispute over this issue with a pastor, and he couldn't even reference his own children because his own sons had gone out and become, lived in debauchery. So he had to reference some guy who was completely an anomaly, which we don't, but he was living with his grandma. I mean, he was still living in some sort of parental thing or whatever. But my point was just sort of like, you can't even reference your own children in that regard. And he was trying to convince my eldest, who eventually went out. And again, what happened? Corruption. Like, it's going to happen every time. I don't care who you are. And yeah, sure, by the grace of God, can God pull some people back from that? Yeah, he can. But why put your children in a place that God told you not to put them in just because God can pull them back from it? That's stupid. That's what the fool does in Proverbs.
Well, even going back to something we talked about last week, but as a pastor, you want to find yourself disqualified really quickly. Let your kids do what they want.
Right.
Like, why are you not guarding your house like to the like why? Right? It's like, no, you should have the fences high there.
Well, it goes back to being an example too. What we were talking about before, right? It's like, hey, be an example with your kids. If you've ruined all your kids, don't advise people how to raise kids.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I guess the thing too, like, it's easy to see, okay, well, I want to protect my daughters. For instance, I have 4 daughters, so this is a lot on my mind of how do I protect my daughters from the things that I unfortunately experienced and participated in. And one of the biggest problems that I see in this is I left the house at 18, and until I came to this church and was watching Drake's child as a baby, that was the first time I had ever changed a diaper in my life. And I was 30 years old. That's a problem.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a problem when you're that unfamiliar with children, and then you're thinking, oh, I'm supposed to start a family. I don't know anything about babies. I don't know anything about caring for a family, because I've spent, more than a decade basically living however I wanted and having all the free time that I wanted and having no family context on what this is even supposed to look like. So it makes it very challenging for women, particularly when you take them out of the family and then you expect them to be godly, submissive wives and mothers without any practical experience. I was talking to someone at church who's younger and married and expecting her first, and she was saying, oh yeah, I changed a diaper when I was like 7, 8 years old or whatever age it was, but a very young age. And I'm thinking, well, it would have been great to have that experience, to actually live in a family where there was life and where I was helping other people in the church and where that was continuing, so that I felt prepared to have my own family. Like, we talk a lot about on-the-job experience when we talk about worldly things, but when it comes to participating in the family life and how that's real-world experience, we not only think that it's not necessary, but we think it's problematic. Because I will see women online who will look at large families and they'll look at the teenage daughters helping to care for babies and toddlers that are their siblings, and they'll say, well, that's just abusive. That's so abusive that the mom is forcing her teenage daughters to take care of the siblings.
Right.
I have a 5-year-old daughter, and what does she want to do all day? Take care of the baby all day long. She loves it. I can't get the baby out of her hands sometimes because she wants to take care of the baby. That's what we should be perpetuating in the lives of young women, so that they're not only capable but excited about having their own families and looking forward to raising their own children. That was not an experience that I had.
Yeah, that's kind of like looking at kids who used to help out on the farm or the household, like young kids or whatever, and be like, "Oh, that's abusive." It's like, who would say it's abusive to have your kid go feed the pigs? Like it's or shovel hay. It's like, no, that's called work. You're training them to
No,
be
because caring for an
workers.
animal, we think caring for an animal is valuable experience, but caring for a child is degrading.
Yeah, well, that's the irony.
That's actually how that's how we treat women as well, and mothers.
Yeah.
Oh, if you go
Yeah.
out of the house, that's empowering, but if you're taking care of children, that's degrading. And that's the
Yeah.
message that we push down to kids.
Well, what's interesting is it comes from fear. I think a lot. I think there's selfishness there. I think there's also fear that I need to get my kids ready for life. And we've been trained to think, well, women, they need to have a career, because what if there's not a man that comes along? And, so and how do you get trained for a career? Well, she needs to go to college, which, is pretty much, these days an orgy fest. And you don't really learn anything except to be indoctrinated by all sorts of like Marxist philosophies and whatnot. But what you end up having then is that the highest amount of divorce rate is among college educated women. Why do you think that is? It's not simply because, they were indoctrinated with feminism. That's not the only reason. It's because you let them out and to enjoy what they think is freedom. And now marriage looks like slavery. Kids look like slavery. And then they start getting bitter over the fact that, well, man, I'm enslaved with this life. And this husband, he doesn't do anything. And they become bitter, and then they're going to end up divorced. It's like 80% of divorces are started by wives, and I think by the women, and initiated by them. And then ultimately, I want to say it's 50 to 60% of those women, it might be higher than that. Or no, I'm sorry, I think 80% is the number of the college educated women. So 80% of college educated women initiate divorce if they're married. And I think that stems from this experiencing of freedom, and then you experience children, which is it's a huge burden. But it's not seen as a delightful burden. It's not saying it like, I'm doing something my mother did. I'm passing on a generation of people to where my husband and his family are living on through what I'm doing. I'm literally becoming what I should be, what God has made me to be as the helpmeet. Instead of that, it's like, oh, this is a burden. I should be out enjoying life and taking vacations and working and all that garbage. I do want to say one more thing. I do think, since we're talking about the parents, I do think as you get older as children, you need to seek out the guidance of your parents. It's not just enough to, we talk about, you should have children, you shouldn't use birth control, but it's not enough just to do that. You need to raise your children too. And in the same way, it's not just enough to have them in the household. You need to guide them, but your parents aren't psychic. They don't know everything that's going on in your life. You have to come to them and tell them, and you have to be willing to be guided by them. And so really it's both parties that need to participate into this whole thing. And so if you have rebellious kids, it's not going to work. They're not going to do it.
I think I can't emphasize more something you said. It's the fear. There's two things, like the fear from fathers that think they don't have the worldview to train their children. The best they can do is make sure they have food. But to train their minds, that's got to be somebody else. Because either they don't see it themselves to be able to do it, or they've just never been taught. They don't even know where to start to cultivate that kind of worldview to teach their kids. And then two, culture does tell men, especially right now, that you shouldn't. it's not like you actually should let them go, let the culture, let us raise them, let us put in the important things. You let them, just give them sustenance. We'll give them thoughts.
Mm.
Yeah.
And most guys are like, well, okay, it's worked out. I have a lot of peers around me that seems to have worked, and I guess I'll go down that route too. And and again, sometimes it does, like on the surface looks like it works, right? But then down the line, perpetually it falls apart. But
Yeah.
so it is for fathers. We have, we as pastors especially, we got to push fathers to both press into the teaching from the church, because you're going to get that from the church, you're going to get that from scripture. And that's why it's so important, we've reiterated this so many times, of going to as many gatherings you can in your whatever local body you're part of, and cultivate that worldview, because it Christianity is not just salvation from your sins, but it's a total transformation. uh, it's transformative, and
Yeah.
it's going to transform your mind, and you impart that transformation to your children, because again, they're not disconnected from you, they are Christians too. So right, so like you're giving your image, like your child is the image of you, the mind of Christ, as you are getting the mind of Christ. And you could do with that, like stop fearing that, because you are going to fail. And even does Paul say it? Our fathers who did what? No, Hebrews. Sorry, the, our fathers who did what they thought was best raising us. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're going to screw it up. Even yeah, it's not going to be the best all the time, but God's going to, you're right. God will correct through His grace, through other godly peers around Him, and that's why we take oaths in church. Hey, we're going to help you raise your children, so we can be those bulwarks for each other. And then also you see the importance of having a local, tight, godly, holy group of Christians that are stable, meaning like, we're not jumping from church to church, and as much as we can with our jobs, trying to stay put and cultivate these things. Like, there is a way to do this. It's not lofty. It's not, well, if I had better circumstances, or if I had better this, like we can do this.
Well, and I think, look, if fear of life circumstances are the motivation for what you're doing, rather than faith in Scripture, then you're already gonna mess it up. Like, you're purposely. I mean, to quote Kung Fu Panda.
Stop it. Stop doing that.
One often finds its destiny on the road he takes to avoid it, right? So it's sort of like you're fearing circumstances. You're afraid you're going to mess up as a father. But by doing that and being like, oh, I'm worried, you need to have a career. I need to make sure you have a career. I'm going to send you away to college. I need to make sure that you can handle life. So I need to kick you out, and you just have a single life and whatnot. You're actually ruining, you're working toward the ruin of their life. Now, again, God can help people and correct them and pull them back, but they're still going to struggle because of that. You're actually getting in the way by thinking, oh, I need to fear these circumstances. What you actually need to do is have faith in Scripture and say, no, this is the reason my kids need to leave, to cling to their spouses, and that's it. And so I'm going to keep them and guide them until they do that. And I'm going to guide them into those marriages, and I'm going to give them some advice and say, hey, not this guy and not that girl, but this guy and that girl, and all of that. I'm going to kind of govern those things so they're not on their own, and they have some sort of sense of wisdom in what they're doing.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, it's not
Is it from Kung Fu Panda, or?
It's not Kung Fu Panda. It's from Appointment in Samara, which is a very famous story.
That's harder to
Anyway.
remember. Everybody knows Kung Fu Panda.
Okay, I just can't let it go. It will pain me. What Drake's talking about, though, is that ultimately your kid's homeschool experience does not end at the age of 18. It continues until they go off to start their own families. And I know that I think I've said this to Drake before. I think I've talked to Drake about this before. I don't know if I've said this in a podcast, but part of what I think that sometimes we miss when we talk about homeschooling and discipling our children is we focus so much on the child. What is the child getting out of this? What is the child learning from this? And is the child prepared? And that's so much of where the weight is. And I'm not saying that's not important, but we often forget, like you were saying and alluding to, Brian, that there are two sides of this. And when you're kicking your children out at 18, you are actually losing the benefit of that reciprocal education. That there is something sanctifying that's happening for the parent in raising your children to the point of starting their own family. That you still have that period of time with them, that those conversations that you're having with them, and there's more discernment required in the situations that they're in at those ages. It's a testing of you as well in your faith, and a sanctifying of you in your faith as much as it is for the child. So when you have this kind of empty nester syndrome and you just want to kick them out because that you think that's preparing them, you're shortchanging yourself as well. You're missing out on an opportunity to learn things through that relationship with your child that God has for you, because you're being impatient for them to move on to the next step, instead of trusting that God has a timeline and a time in mind for them to move on, and a natural progression for them to move to the next step. You don't need to force that.
Well, because we think that, again, we think independence and even gaining like knowledge of the world or something like that is where it's at. But again, I would just go back to, what is our primary problem in the world? Our primary problem is we want to be our own gods. We want to run our lives our own way. Our primary problem is independence. It's rebellion. So how do we go against that problem? Well, to negate that, we yield. We submit. We put ourselves under authority that God has placed us under. And so it is a sanctifying thing that we are robbing our children of. And ironically, we're learning to yield and submit to God's program rather than because we want, like, another room empty so we can turn it into something else or whatever it may be. Or we can tell the guy down the street, my kid's going here and he's doing this or whatever. We're yielding ourselves and maybe what we want our kids to do to God in doing it. So we're actually robbing ourselves, like you said, of sanctification as well, and the sanctification that takes place in that relationship. And so, unfortunately, we have bought the lie of putting value on things that the world puts value on. And we have a lot of people who really know how to work and really, have a lot of degrees and have a lot of life experience with sexuality and all that sort of thing, who are, I think, spiritually and morally bankrupt because of what we've done. And then we're sending them into marriages this way.
It's a lot to chew on. Like, as we said in the outset, I don't think this is something many people have heard. Maybe they've considered it, but it seems kind of radical. But I would go back to what you opened with. Look at what creation has laid out, and point everything back to there. What is more creational? What am I doing that is pointing back more to what God intended in the beginning, as Christ always goes back to when he's the Pharisees are trying to trap him in things that are ethically gray in their time. I think that's an important thing to do, and then let put yourself under that authority, as you said, Brian.
Well, can I warn? I just want to leave with a warning as well. Here's the warning: don't fall for the caricatures. Right? So the caricatures are going to be like, oh, well, if they're going to be in your house, they're just going to be playing video games in the basement and growing out their hair and
only
being
if
slobs.
you let them.
It's like, well, yeah, then you're not. That's my whole point of, like, you have to have them home and guide them. You can't just like have them at home. That's not doing anything. Like, you have to actually be guiding. In the same way, just having children but then not raising them isn't doing anything. You're just creating more horrible people for the world. So don't do the caricature thing. Do the biblical thing. Like, have them at home and use that time. Again, I say this both to the parents and to the children. Seek out guidance if you're the child, and seek to guide so that your children can actually have some sort of wisdom as they're growing and coming into their own, and they're able to switch over to another family through marriage.
Yeah, because you will get you'll caricature yourself, or you'll get caricatured by someone.
Yeah.
I guess on that point, just before we go there, I think practically people maybe can understand this with sons, right? Well, where they would say, okay, well, your son is at home, and so you're going to require that he is working and that he's learning to provide and that he's contributing to the house. But what are the women supposed to do? They're just supposed to lounge around and wait to be married, right? From a practical perspective, you can still have adult daughters who are contributing in the life of the church, even if you no longer have any young children. They can be helping with other families and their young children, and contribute and continuing to contribute to the life of the family within the larger body of the church. Just because your daughter isn't going out and working a 9 to 5 does not mean that she's going to be doing whatever the social equivalent is of sitting around in a basement playing video games.
Well,
She also is meant to be contributing in ways that will help her family later.
right. And even let's say you don't have any children left and there's no children in the church or whatever, she still is learning to yield to her father's authority, which is what she has to do in marriage to her husband. And so she is being trained that whole time. There's not a part in her life where she's sent out and she learns to not be under authority, and she just does what she wants, which is training to basically not be married, to get divorced. So even then, she's training to do that, and she's working toward the household. Believe me, even with children who are starting to grow up, there's plenty to do in the household that she'll need to do when she becomes a wife and a mother. So,
Well, and you can be creative as well. Like, I think
totally.
sometimes we have caricatures of women as, okay, well, she's just going to be doing laundry all day or something. And there's nothing wrong with contributing in that way. But I look at, even like, my daughter is doing violin, and she said to me the other day, oh, I want to teach violin lessons when I get older. And so I'm trying to talk to her and explain to her, okay, well, how would that be something that would benefit your family? And how would that benefit the life of the church? Or, maybe she's doing violin in church or whatever, right? You can use the skills that you have and continue to figure out ways to serve the body and your family and your community with whatever skills. We are not very creative when it comes to thinking about ways to serve one another. We just have these very tight, constrained boxes, and we say, okay, this is the only thing you can do, and this is the only thing you can do. And we're not, because I think we're not framing things in terms of the good of the family and the good of the body, we actually have less freedom to be creative in our pursuits, not more.
Well, and even with the things that might be viewed as more mundane, right? We're not being creative with those, right? So it's like, well, yeah, I mean, what's she going to do? She's going to make hot dogs for dinner. And it's like, why don't you teach her how to cook something beyond hot dogs? Why don't you teach her actually how to bake things beyond, just simple, bread or something? I mean, in other words, like, it's like, be creative with that stuff. Learn, have her learn like different soaps to do laundry with or something, instead of just taking toxic detergent. Right.
You can learn to make your own soap.
Teach her the life skills that women have always had. In the same way, teach your sons the life skills that men have always had, that frankly we are losing and have lost.
Who wants the last word? Or should we leave it there?
You guys can go ahead. I'm done. That was my last word.
Okay.
Make your own laundry detergent.
Make your own Fight Club. Make your own soap.
That was a summary of everything that I really, that's all I wanted to say, this entire thing.
Clean up the mess, make your own soap.
Make your own soap. Well, like I said, engage with us. Hit the like button. Put a comment. Hate it, love it. Engage, and so more people can see it. We can hang out with more people, and they can join the discussion. If you'd like to help us even more, we have a Patreon. There it is. You can join that. You don't have to pay for it, I think. I don't know why you would join it. I think you get the videos at the same time as they know. I don't even know. What do we do? It used to be like you would get
You get them ahead of time.
non-theological- Huh?
You usually are supposed to get them ahead of time.
Well, yeah, I guess. Okay, so you usually get videos ahead of time, and then if we ever get back to doing second, tertiary topics like books or fiction, we'll throw that on there. But if you like to, if you want more of that, join. You can subscribe there and tell us, and then maybe we'll do it. But other than that, thanks for watching. Hopefully, we'll have 4 on the record for 2026 or 5, whatever it is, very soon. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.